Hey everyone, and welcome to the Retro Channel, and today we are checking out the Intellivision. Not a console that I'm super familiar with. These were sort of around during I think it's the second generation of consoles. Similar time period to the Atari 2600 and the ColecoVision and the Fairchild Channel F. I don't know much about these things, but one thing I do know is that it only features an RF output. And that's kind of a problem in this day and age. Not a lot of people have access to an analog TV tuner, and even though I do, I prefer to avoid using RF. So we're going to do a little something special with this unit, because in this little bag here, Copper Dragon has sent over a bunch of new boards to look at, and one of them happens to be the STICdigitizer, which will basically sniff the data and address buses in this machine and turn them into a LumaCode signal, which we can then send to something like the RGBtoHDMI and have it output pixel perfect HDMI video. Now, a bit of soldering will be required because this board is designed to be mounted underneath the stick chip, which in these machines is like the video chip. I think it stands for like standard television interface chip, standard television IC. I don't remember. I'm not super familiar with the Intellivision, like I said. And speaking of that, I don't actually know if this machine works. I have opened it up just to take a look because these do just have a regular AC input, so they do have an inbuilt power supply. So I did have a peek inside to make sure that all looked good, and I checked some voltages. It seems to be fine, but I don't actually know if this thing is fully working. So let's get an analog TV tuner before we go trying to get HDMI from this thing, and just make sure that it is actually working. Right, so we'll use the DMTech 4x3 LCD for this thing because, as you can see, it does have an analog TV tuner. And let's plug all this stuff in, see if we can pick up a signal from this thing. Power on. Oh, we might need a cartridge. I don't think it'll do much without a cartridge, so let's get that plugged in. And there's no lights on this thing. You don't even know if it's turned on. I assume it's running at the moment, so let's see if we can tune it in. Auto program. UK? Sure, why not? It's almost a video signal. Alright, well, we'll let that do its thing. Hopefully it'll find something. Yeah, even though like I did sort of grow up around this time period, so very familiar with, having to use RF outputs, I can't say I'm a fan of it. I know some people will be like, oh, that's the way it was back then and that's how you should still do it today. But yeah, I got to say, not a fan of RF. Even composite video is a bit ugh. S-video, I think, is the sweet spot for analog signals, like basic analog TV signals or video signals. HDMI, very cool to have, and I know HDMI output is going to be really handy for a lot of people these days. Personally, I still love to use a CRT. I think that's probably obvious. So it's not such a big deal for me, but I know the convenience factor for a lot of people is certainly, a big deal. Is this actually going to find this console? I mean, I assume it's on. Well, now what? Okay, I think whatever this is actually from, well, I guess we can turn this off. Yeah, it does change, so I'm guessing that's the Intellivision somewhere in there, but it doesn't seem to be running. Could be a dodgy cartridge. Oh, there we go. Just needed a reseat. Yeah, pretty crappy signal, but it seems to work. I think there's like little overlays for these controllers because, they've obviously got a bunch of different buttons, so I'm not sure how to actually start this game. Oh, there we go. Was that me? I think it was. And there is sound. Yes. Audio is something that LumaCode doesn't cover, so we'll have to deal with that separately. It only handles the video portion of this. Does look kind of fun though. Anyway, this thing is working, so let's open it up and stick this digitizer in it, see if we can get HDMI from it. So, I think there's 6 screws on the underside. They're just regular Phillips head ones, so pretty easy to remove. I've just realized there's a channel selector switch on the bottom, so that would be VHF channel 0, which makes sense as why it found it pretty much straight away. All right, that should be the screws out. Now the top should lift off. I think we might have to pull the controllers out a bit. Oh, and this power switch just sort of, pops out. And with that, we are in. So let's feed the controllers back through the case. And yeah, like I said, there is actual mains power supply here, so always do this with the machine unplugged if you're not sure what you're doing, because you don't want to accidentally get, 240 volts or even 110 volts going into your body. So next thing to do is take out another 6 screws, which hold this plastic cover piece on top. And these are all the same size, which is always nice. And we should be able to remove that and take these little controller cables out. And then we've got our main board under here, which is covered in an RF shield. And there is this little pretty crappy ribbon cable taking power from this power board into the main board. And also this plug, which only has a single wire connected to it. I thought this may have been missing when I first opened this thing up, but no, apparently that's how it's supposed to be. I think at this point we should just be able to lift this whole assembly out. Yes, we can. And just to make it easy, I'm just going to unplug these controllers so they're not following us around. Alright, so here we go. Yes, this whole thing is encased in a big RF shield. I already took a look under here, so I've already desoldered it, but there are a number of solder tabs around the outside of this thing that you'll have to desolder or cut off in order to get this thing open. There's even one that connects to some of the pins on the cartridge port, which is kind of funny. Obviously it just connects to some of the ground pins under there, but yeah, you'll have to deal with that as well. And there's also this little tiny wire which was also connected to this ground shield. But once you've got all that out of the way, you should be able to remove these RF shields, hopefully. Maybe. There we go. That's the underside. And there's the top side. So yeah, this is what an Intellivision board looks like. So yeah, it definitely looks to be built to a cost. Obviously there's no solder mask on the top side, so we do have all these nice exposed traces. The underside does, however, have solder mask on it, although it looks, pretty average, but I guess standard for the day. What we're interested in though is the stick chip, which is under this heatsink here, so the second chip in from the front. And you can see the notch is marked on the silk screen. So pin 1 is going to be this top corner pin, but when we flip the board over, this pin over here is actually pin 1. So with our little STICdigitizer board, we need to make sure this is aligned with pin 1, which is marked over here with a 1. So it should go something like that, and just to be sure, there's our notch in the silk screen, so pin 1 is up this end, and that is correct. The only parts we need to solder here are the pins in the little squares, so pin 1 obviously, these guys up here, and it looks like these two down here. Now the board itself doesn't really sit flush, so I think I might just try and trim down some of these little through holes here which are poking up out of the board in between this chip. So I'm just going to try and cut them as flush as possible, and then I might just go over them with the soldering iron just to make sure I haven't, messed up any of these joints. Looks pretty good. I might just put a drop of liquid flux over here just to make sure this old solder flows properly. Clean that up before we put our digitizer board on. Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything pretty, just as long as it's sort of more of a flat surface, and it's not going to scratch up this board underneath, because Although most of the traces look to be on this top side, I can see there are a couple on the underside here. So it'd probably be bad luck, but I guess one of these could potentially, rub against these traces and over time cause some kind of short or a broken trace. So with that all cleaned up, we can now put this back on, making sure pin 1 is correctly aligned, and then flow some solder into these holes marked with the little square around the outside, and that should be our install almost done. Try and make them pretty. That'll do it. I'm not going to solder all the pins because there's no point, and if I ever need to get this off, it's going to be a little bit easier without having every single pin soldered. So just the ones marked in the squares are perfectly fine. Now all we need to do is run the LumaCode signal plus ground out of this console and over to the RGBtoHDMI. I'm hoping that the OSSC will also support LumaCode from the Intellivision at some point. I know support has been added for I think the NES, some of the Atari systems, and some of the Commodore systems. And yeah, hopefully we'll see more of that with the OSSC, because personally, as good as the RGBtoHDMI is, it doesn't handle audio, which is kind of a big downside because LumaCode doesn't carry audio, so you still need to deal with audio separately, and having the OSSC being able to handle audio and the LumaCode signal means you can run both of those into the OSSC and have them, audio and video output over the HDMI connector. So now all we need to do is run the LumaCode signal from here to the RGBtoHDMI, which will process it and give us a HDMI output. I'm not going to hook this up permanently just yet because I don't know if I want to just hijack this RF output. So let's just temporarily connect these wires just so we can hook it up to the RGBtoHDMI and make sure this thing is working as expected. So we'll tin these two pads and tin our wires, which Copper Dragon included with the board. So that can be our LumaCode wire, that can be our ground. And I'm just going to mark which side of this wire is the LumaCode signal. So that's that one. Maybe I should have marked ground instead, considering it's a black marker, but oh well. So I'm just going to temporarily throw all this back in the case so I can hook it up to power again. Won't bother about the RF shields for now. In fact, probably won't bother about them at all. Make sure this crappy ribbon goes back in properly. And this random single wire. Right, I found my Raspberry Pi Zero, so this should work just fine. And I also have the RGBtoHDMI plus LumaCode board. So it has a little RCA connector on the end. Normally you'd wire LumaCode up to the RF output of the console that you're dealing with. But seeing as we haven't sort of hardwired anything yet, I'm just going to kind of hold the wires on this plug and hopefully that'll be good enough. I guess we'll see, but first of all we need to set up the Raspberry Pi SD card. So let's pop this out and get it in the computer. Right, so over on the computer, we're going to go to Copper Dragon's GitHub page. I'll have everything linked in the video description that you need to find, along with a pinned comment with any important updates. Like I said, this hasn't officially been released yet for the Intellivision, so any news that comes along, I'll put it in that pinned comment, so be sure to check there. Over on Copper Dragon's GitHub page, we can head to LumaCode. And somewhere in here, I guess documentation wiki. Yes, here it is. So it is listed on his GitHub page already, but like I said, I don't think it's for sale as of the time of filming this video. So we need the RGBtoHDMI software. That's pretty easy. Yeah, we'll just save that in downloads. And then we need this these extra files because, yeah, it's not officially supported by the RGBtoHDMI yet, so these are just like palette files, I think. So once we've got all that, we can unzip all this stuff. So I'm just going to extract everything from the RGBtoHDMI zip file over to an SD card, which has just been freshly formatted as FAT32. And once that's done, we can also extract the other zip file with the Intellivision extra files over to the SD card as well. And with that all done, we can eject this and move back over to the Raspberry Pi. All right, so RGBtoHDMI should be on. Looks like it is. So I'm just gonna sort of hold these wires onto the connector. We might get a bit of interference, but we should at least get something out of this. So Intellivision. Oh, there it is, sort of. It is very noisy, which, yeah, doesn't help, you know, having all these wires dangling everywhere and me just sort of holding them onto the connector, but it is mostly working, which is all I wanted to confirm right now. So what we need to do is work out how we're going to wire this up a bit more permanently and hopefully not pick up a bunch of interference over this big long cable. So let's remove this again, pull this board out. And I think I'm going to repurpose the RF output jack for LumaCode instead. Obviously, I have no interest in using RF anymore. The tricky part is going to be the audio side of things. I guess we'll have to, you know, put a little 3.5mm jack somewhere. Unfortunately, this machine only has RF output, so it's not like we can sort of repurpose another jack or another hole in the case, because pretty sure it's only going to have the one for the RF, which is on the bottom side of the case. Yeah, there's only that one hole. There is the channel switch, but there's not really any room underneath this machine. There's a couple of small little feet, but not enough to really stick a connector under there. So maybe our best bet is to run it straight up across here and then into the RF modulator can, which isn't soldered on, which is nice. And then just sort of up into there. So it looks like all we've got in here is a resistor going to the middle pin of this RF output jack. So I could snip that off. Let's see if we can desolder it. No, I just cut through it. That's fine. All right, well, that's our RF output freed up. Throw a bit of fresh solder on here. And connect our LumaCode signal to that middle pin. And we can just connect the ground to this can somewhere, maybe right in the corner. There we go, that should be fine. So our LumaCode signal is going to the middle pin of the RF output, and we've removed this resistor that was connecting the old RF signal, and then the ground just goes to the outside of this can with a bit of solder. I may still need to shorten these wires, but for now we're just going to reassemble it and just sort of have the wire go through the lid a little bit. That'll be fine. Let's give this a test. So we can now plug our LumaCode into the old RF output. All right, power's connected, everything's hooked up. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Still a little bit of noise in there. So let's have a look at the sampling menu. Just play around with the sampling phase. Oh, and there we go. Just changing it to 4 seems to have done it. That looks perfect. Just power that off for a second so I can plug in a controller. They even have the little overlay cards, so these just slot in like so. And now we know what buttons do what. Although, at the moment, no buttons are doing anything. So I might have it in the wrong controller port. Right, let's try that again in the other controller port. Oh yes, all right, so the side button seems to have started the game. How do I play it? I'm guessing I'm that frog. Must be, right? Yum yum. Clearly, I have no idea what I'm doing. But it is working, although the screen is a bit off-center. Let's see if we can fix that. Geometry. Horizontal offset. There we go. That'll do. Adjusting the horizontal offset to 32 pretty much centers everything. There's a solid pixel or half a pixel on the left side, but that's good enough. So now we just need audio. It's got to be that fucking ribbon cable. Dodgy fucking shit. So I thought I'd killed this thing for a minute. Turns out it's just this dodgy ass ribbon cable that they used. It is splitting apart. Not a big surprise. So let me get that replaced with something a little less flimsy. Yeah, look at that. Just junk. Right, a new cable has been constructed. The particular connector I used are KF2510s. Anyway, 2.54 mil spacing, which is pretty standard. We should be able to just plug that in that side. Plug this in this side. We should be back in business. Right, so the last piece of the puzzle is audio. And yeah, I'm pretty sure it enters the RF modulator on this pin right here. So let's have a look on the scope, make sure we can safely connect to that. Yeah, I'd say that definitely looks pretty audio-like. All right, so it does have a DC offset of around 5 volts, so we'll need to stick a capacitor in there just to remove that DC offset. But because it's an audio signal, there's usually a high input impedance, so it doesn't need to be a massive capacitor. Something around 1 microfarad should be fine. In fact, I might go with this one, which is a 2.2 microfarad, 50 volts, so yeah, plenty of rating in there. And we need to stick the positive side to the audio going into the RF modulator, and then the negative side will be our audio output. So just for a quick test, let's just tack this in here. Doesn't need to be too pretty. And then if we hook the scope up to this side, right, that looks better. So we can see it's mostly centered around 0 volts, but keep in mind we don't actually have a load connected to this output, so it is still going to float a little bit above 0 volts. Once we connect something to the other end of this capacitor, we should be good. So I think I'm just going to use a 3.5 mil female jack and just sort of mount this somewhere, and then we can easily just use either, you know, a 3.5 to 3.5 mil for our audio, or a 3.5 to RCA for our audio connection. I think that's our best bet, seeing as we don't have another, you know, output that we can hijack on this console. So as the RF jack is already taken up by our LumaCode signal, we're just going to have to sort of bodge this in somewhere. Right, so the audio circuit is over here, so could grab it off this resistor on this side. That might be a little bit better. I wonder is C2... Huh. C2 is also connected to that side of the resistor. Oh, it's in parallel with this resistor. So we could put the positive side of the capacitor in that side of C2, and then we'll just have the negative side going to our 3.5 mil jack. I think that's the way to go. Alright, so I've just hooked up a random bit of wire with one end going to the negative side of this capacitor, and obviously the positive side goes to the bottom side of C2, which wasn't populated, and the other end is just connected to this ground rail around the outside of the board. Now we just need to connect this end to our 3.5 mil jack and stick it through the case somewhere. So if the board sits in like this, I'll just mount it underneath these grills here. I reckon just cable tie that 3.5 mil jack. Yeah, it's going to be a bit bodgy, but it'll work. It'll be secure. It'll do. Right, that's the ground connected, and because this is a stereo jack, I'm just going to wire both channels together because it's only a mono console. All right, there we go. Nothing pretty, but that's what I promised. Done. Of course, this does mean that, you know, this is going through the case now, so I can't really pull out the board very far, but I guess I can always desolder it if I need to get the board out. Probably should plug in the other controller before I forget, and then we'll give this a final test. So it goes that way. Lasers out. Now the only challenge left is what to hook this up to. Obviously we can't hook it up to the RGBtoHDMI because it doesn't support audio. Possibly it will in the future, but at the moment that's not going to happen. If the OSSC gets support for the LumaCode from the Intellivision, then that's going to be much easier because you can plug both LumaCode, like the output from the RF jack, and this straight into the OSSC, and it'll do the rest. So hopefully that'll happen once this is officially released, but yeah, big shout out to Marcus for adding support to the OSSC. Yeah, it's basically, you know, a free feature update, so yeah, very cool to see, and like I said, I do prefer the OSSC with LumaCode for that exact reason, but right now we're going to have to work around that, so what I'm going to use instead is a HDMI audio embedder. This will take our analog audio input and the video output from the RGBtoHDMI, mix those together and give us a HDMI output with both audio and video. So yeah, not ideal, but it's kind of the best solution I've got at the moment. All right, are we going to have audio? Is this thing going to work at all? What is it doing? Yep, nothing. Is this controller somehow stopping this one from working? Oh, okay. Well, yep, we've got audio. For whatever reason, plugging in this controller stops this controller from working. Right, so I plugged this controller into port 1 and now it's not working either. So something's wrong with this controller, I think. Yeah, and plugging the working controller into the second port makes me player 2, but it works just fine, I think. So, definitely a problem with this thing. I'm going to sort that out later because I don't have anyone else to play with right now, so it's just going to be me. So who needs a second controller anyway? Let's throw a few screws in this thing and put the cover back on so it looks pretty. And no, I'm not going to worry about the RF shield. Not right now, anyway. Just going to make sure I don't trap that cable. Alright, so I've just cable tied that to the case. Yeah, it's not ideal, but any of these systems that only had an RF output, you're always going to struggle, even with a composite upgrade, because you need composite video and then audio, so you're going to face the same problem. It'll do for now. It's good enough. Let's fire this thing up for the last time, at least for this video, and play some games. So, in this old suitcase is a number of other games. I actually know the original owner of this machine. I guess he probably had it from you, so yeah, thank you, John, for donating this machine. I know we just wanted to clear out some space, but I do very much appreciate it. And yeah, he had a collection of a few games, and even the little overlays, which I think are there for all these games. Looks like it. And looks like we have all the manuals as well, along with Beauty and the Beast. Yeah, there we go. Baseball, auto racing, drafts, space battle, snafu, frog bog, Beauty and the Beast. Oh, and the owner's manual. I'm guessing no schematics. No, very basic. Oh, And that was Beauty and the Beast. Maybe we should try this one. Can't forget these. Stick this in. Probably should actually read the instructions for this game, but let's see if we can manage. Cool. Ah! Do cats hurt? Or is that a rat? That hurt. Can I go inside? Jump. Okay. I know how to jump. Move Buford. That must be, I must be Buford. Do I... Oh. Am I supposed to go inside? Supposed to... Oh, hang on. How did I climb? Ooh. Alright, so I think you can climb up the open windows, and that's how you get to the top. Yeah. Oh, ah. Yeah. Is that bad? Don't know. And people might give this controller shit, but it's not that bad. I've certainly used worse controllers. We've got to get to the top, right? We can do this. Oh, shit. Yeah, the controller's great. Oof. Oh, yeah. Ah. Oh. Is that the first time I've actually jumped a barrel? Are they called barrels in this, or is that a copyright infringement right there? What? Why did I... Ah! Oh, fuck. Oh no! Well, there you go. That is HDMI from the Intellivision. A big thanks to Copper Dragon for sending over that board for me to test out. Yeah, seems to be working just fine. Like I said, hopefully we'll get support with the OSSC soon, because it does already support a number of LumaCode systems, and yeah, hopefully this will be another one of them, because I am kind of looking forward to checking this thing out. Yeah, like I said, never had an Intellivision, never really touched one until a few days ago. So yeah, I kind of like it. It feels slightly more advanced than the 2600, but could be wrong with that. We'll see what happens. I'm also going to need to sort out this second controller. It probably just needs a good clean or something. I imagine like there's a button that's stuck on that's just, you know, messing with the rest of the system. I don't know. But yeah, pretty cool to have. I will certainly be playing a few more games on this thing to try it out. And there are a couple more new LumaCode projects on the horizon. And Copper Dragon did also send me a couple of those to try out. So we'll also be looking at a couple more systems soon enough. But until then, thank you all for watching. A huge thanks to the people that support the channel on Patreon. If you want to do the same, links to that are in the video description. You'll get ad-free early access and also discounts on my Tindy store. Sorry, no discounts on Copper Dragon's Tindy store. That's up to him. But yeah, that is it for this one. Thank you all for watching. Yeah, be sure to check the pinned comment for any updates on this particular project. I'll try and keep that up to date as possible. But until next time, see you next time. Bye. One more game. Help if I didn't take the cartridge out. Ooh, we're at the top. Oh, I thought that was me. Where are you going? Oh, man. Check out my work cable. Oh, it's offending me.